What does it cost to humiliate a teenage boy at an airport? For one flight attendant, it cost her job, her reputation, and her future. For one of the world's fastest-growing airlines, it cost them everything. We're not talking about a fine or a lawsuit. We're talking about the complete and utter cancellation of a $2 billion international expansion, a stock price crash that wiped out investors and the firing of a CEO. This isn't a cautionary tale. It's the true story of how a single act of prejudice at a boarding gate in New York triggered a corporate cataclysm across the globe, all because they picked the wrong person to mess with. The air in JFK's Terminal 4 was a familiar symphony of chaos. The low hum of floor polishers, the staccato clatter of rolling suitcases, the cacophony of final boarding calls for flights to cities most people couldn't find on a map. It was the pulse of the world. For 17-year-old Elias Vance, it was just background noise. He sat slouched in one of the uncomfortable metal chairs near gate B27. His attention focused on the complex code scrolling across his laptop screen. He was a study in teenage anonymity. A faded grey hoodie, the hood pulled up over a pair of high-end Bose headphones that sealed him off from the world. Worn jeans, scuffed Nike sneakers. To any casual observer, he was just another kid, maybe a student heading off on a backpacking trip or a visit to relatives. His backpack resting by his feet looked like any other student's, a bit lumpy, a water bottle sticking out of the side pocket. No one would guess it contained a prototype microserver and proprietary hardware worth more than the average suburban home. He was flying Aura Air Flight AA-127 direct to Singapore. It was a trip he'd been looking forward to for months, not for a vacation, but for work. He was the lead architect on a project codenamed Nightingale, a revolutionary logistics and customer experience platform that his father's company, Vance Innovations, was developing. This trip was the final on-site integration test before the system went live, underpinning Aura Air's massive $2 billion expansion into the Asian market. He was the only one who knew the system's architecture inside and out. He was in a very real sense the key to their future. But at gate B27, he was just a black teenager in a hoodie. Now, boarding all passengers in Group 3, a crisp voice announced over the PA system. Elias glanced at his first-class ticket. Group 1. He had waited, preferring to be the last to board to maximize his work time. He finished a line of code, ran a quick diagnostic, and, satisfied with the result, closed his laptop. He packed it carefully into his backpack, stood up, stretched, and ambled toward the boarding lane. The line was gone, leaving only the gate agents. One was a young man idly tapping on a screen. The other was a woman who looked to be in her late 40s, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, tight bun. Her name tag read Karen Miller. She had a look of practiced authority, the kind worn by people who have a small amount of power and intend to wield all of it. Her eyes scanned Elias from head to toe, and in that single sweeping glance, a judgment was made. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice laced with a saccharine condescension that set Elias's teeth on edge. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. "Hi, Elias," said, pulling down his hood and offering a polite smile. "Boarding for flight AA-127 to Singapore." He held out his boarding pass and passport. Karen took them, her painted fingernails tapping impatiently on the passport cover. She scanned the boarding pass. Vance Elias, seat 1A. Her eyes flickered from the first-class seat assignment to the boy in the worn hoodie. The two things did not compute in her world-view. "Passport, please," she said again, as if he hadn't already handed it to her. She opened it, studying his photo with an exaggerated scrutiny. She held it up to the light, angled it, and then ran her thumb over the photo page, as if checking for a raised edge. "Is there a problem?" Elias asked, his politeness unwavering but firm. "This passport looks worn," she said, her lips pursed. "The lamination is slightly frayed at the corner here." Elias had used this passport to enter a dozen countries in the last 2 years for Vance Innovations. It had been through biometric scanners in London, fingerprint readers in Tokyo, and the scrutinizing gaze of German immigration officers. No one had ever mentioned a frayed corner. "It's a valid US passport," Elias stated calmly. "It doesn't expire until 2029. Karen ignored him. "And you're flying alone." "How old are you, 17? "Unaccompanied minor," she declared with a note of triumph, as if she'd caught him in a lie. Airline policy is very strict regarding unaccompanied minors on international flights. There's a specific procedure paperwork that needs to be filed at check-in. It doesn't look like that was done. Elias felt a surge of frustration, but kept his voice level. "Ma'am, with all due respect, Aura Air's policy defines an unaccompanied minor as someone under the age of 15. I'm 17. I've flown this airline internationally by myself 4 times in the last year. It has never been an issue." He knew the policy because he had helped write the code for the airline's new booking system that flagged passenger requirements. He knew the exact age cutoffs for 10 different international carriers. Karen's smile was thin and sharp. "Policies can be updated. And as the senior gate agent, I have the final say on who is fit to fly. Given the condition of this passport and your status, I'm not comfortable letting you board." The word hung in the air, status. It was a carefully chosen euphemism, vague enough for plausible deniability, but its meaning was crystal clear. To her, he was a suspicious kid in a hoodie who somehow had a first-class ticket, and she was the bulwark of security, the protector of the premium cabin. "My status?" Elias asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm a paying passenger with a valid ticket and a valid passport." "What status are you referring to?" The direct question seemed to fluster her. Her professional mask slipped, revealing a flash of raw animosity. "I don't have time to debate this with you, young man. The flight is closing. I've made my decision." "Your decision is based on what exactly?" Elias pressed his voice, losing its politeness and gaining a hard, steely edge. "You've implied my passport is fake and that I'm a child who can't travel alone. Both of those are factually incorrect. So what is the real reason?" A man in a pilot's uniform who had been waiting nearby stepped forward. "Karen, what's the hold-up? We need to close the door, just handling a security issue." "Captain," she said, waving him off dismissively. She turned back to Elias. "I am denying you boarding. You can go to the customer service desk and see if they can rebook you once you've sorted out your documentation." "There is nothing to sort out," Elias said, his voice dropping to an almost unnerving calm. The humiliation was a hot coil in his stomach. It wasn't about missing the flight anymore. It was about the casual, dismissive bigotry, the assumption that he didn't belong. "You are making a very, very big mistake." Karen laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Is that a threat? Are you threatening a flight official?" "Now I definitely have cause." Elias simply stared at her for a long moment, his dark eyes unblinking. He took a slow breath, letting the anger cool into something colder, something more precise. He pulled out his phone. "What are you doing?" she snapped. "I'm cancelling my flight," he said softly. "And a few other things." He swiped through his contacts and pressed a name. The phone barely had time to ring once before it was answered. Dad Elias said, his voice steady. "I'm at JFK Gate B27. I've been denied boarding on the flight to Singapore." He paused, listening. "Yes, Aura Air. The agent's name is Karen Miller. She claims my passport is fraudulent and that I'm an unaccompanied minor." He listened again, his eyes locked on Karen's, who was watching with a smug, self-satisfied expression. "No, don't bother calling the airline," Elias continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "It's too late for that. They've made their decision. So now I'm making mine. Please call our legal team. I want you to execute Clause 17.4 of the Aura Air contract, the reputational harm and partner conduct clause. Terminate the Nightingale project. Immediately. Pull all our assets, all our staff, and all our intellectual property. Send the termination notice to Richard Davenport directly. And ground the charter jet. I'm coming home." He ended the call and slid the phone back into his pocket. He looked at Karen Miller, whose smug expression had melted into confusion. She didn't understand the words Nightingale Project or Clause 17.4. But she understood the tone. It was the sound of absolute, unshakable power. "I don't know what little game you think you're playing," she stammered, trying to regain control. "It's not a game," Elias said. He picked up his backpack. "You didn't just deny a passenger boarding. You just cost your company its entire Asia expansion. You just cost your his legacy. And you just cost yourself your job. Have a nice day." He turned and walked away, leaving Karen Miller standing in stunned silence at the gate of a flight she had protected, completely unaware that she had just detonated a bomb in the heart of her own company. The doors to flight AA-137 hissed shut behind him. The plane was on its way to Singapore, but its future had already been cancelled. Elias Vance was not a man accustomed to panic. In the cutthroat world of technology and corporate mergers, he was the predator, not the prey. His company, Vance Innovations, was a titan, a multi-billion-dollar behemoth with its tentacles in everything from cybersecurity and AI logistics to aerospace engineering. Marcus moved markets with a single phone call and dismantled competitors with a quiet word to the right regulator. His office on the 80th floor of One World Trade Center offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan, a perspective he felt he had earned. When his private line, the one reserved for his son, rang, he answered it with a smile. Elias was his pride, a boy who had inherited his late wife's gentle spirit and his own ferocious intellect. The Singapore trip was the culmination of Elias's genius, a project so advanced it would leapfrog Aura Air over its rivals by a decade. The smile vanished as he listened to his son's calm, cold voice. He heard the words denied boarding, fraudulent passport, Karen Miller. But underneath the words he heard the deep, painful humiliation that Elias was trying so hard to conceal. A primal, protective fury ignited within him, an inferno he hadn't felt in years. Then came the instruction: execute Clause 17.4. Terminate the Nightingale project. Marcus felt a flicker of shock, not at the request, but at the sheer, icy resolve in his son's voice. Elias wasn't throwing a tantrum. This was a calculated, strategic execution. Clause 17.4 was a nuclear option he had personally insisted his legal team embed deep within the contract. It was designed to protect Vance Innovations from being associated with a partner whose conduct could cause significant reputational harm. It gave them the unilateral right to terminate the entire agreement with catastrophic penalties for the other party if any agent or employee of Aura Air acted in a manner that was discriminatory, illegal, or brought public disrepute upon the project. It was a poison pill, and Elias had just ordered him to use it. "Consider it done," Marcus said, his voice grim. He hung up and stared at the city below for a full 10 seconds. Then he moved. He pressed an intercom button. "Sarah, get me Robert Stanton in legal on the line. Now, and get the jet crew at Teterboro ready. My son is coming home from JFK." While he waited, he pulled up the Aura Air contract on his hollow screen. He found the clause, its language precise and deadly. He was activating it not just because his son asked, but because he understood the insult. Aura Air hadn't just inconvenienced a passenger. They had disrespected a Vance. They had, through their employee, called his son a fraud and a child. They had, in essence, spat on his family's name. This was no longer business. This was personal. Robert Stanton, his chief counsel, came on the line. "Marcus, what's up?" "Robert, pull up the Aura Air Nightingale contract." Marcus commanded his voice, leaving no room for argument. "We are activating clause 17.4. Draft the termination notice immediately. I want it sent to Richard Davenport's personal email and his entire board of directors within the hour. Cite discriminatory conduct by a gate agent, Karen Miller, at JFK against my son Elias Vance as the triggering event. All Vance Innovations personnel assets and IP related to the project are to be withdrawn effective immediately. All access credentials are to be revoked. Shut it all down." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Marcus, are you sure that's a $2 billion partnership? The penalties alone will bankrupt them." "I am aware of the consequences," Robert Marcus said coldly. "That is the point. Send the notice." He hung up. His next call was to the head of the Nightingale Project's security division. The command was just as blunt. "This is Vance. Project Nightingale is terminated. I want every data link between us and Aura Air severed in the next 60 minutes. Every shared server wiped of our proprietary data. Every login from an Aura Air IP address permanently blocked. Lock them out. Completely." Meanwhile, across town in Aura Air's gleaming headquarters near Long Island City CEO Richard Davenport was schmoozing. He was on a conference call with a group of investors from Singapore, painting a glorious picture of the airline's future. And with the Nightingale platform fully integrated, our operational efficiency in the Asia-Pacific market will be unparalleled, he said, his voice smooth as butter. "We project a 30% increase in passenger volume through our Singapore hub within the first year. This isn't just an expansion, it's a revolution." His assistant, a sharp young woman named Jessica Chen, poked her head into his office, her face pale. She held up a tablet, her expression urgent. Davenport waved her away, impatiently smiling into the camera for his investors. Jessica hesitated, then scribbled a note on a pad and held it up. It was 3 words underlined twice. "Check your email." Davenport's annoyance grew. He held up a finger to the camera. "Gentlemen, 1 moment, please." He muted his microphone and glared at Jessica. "This had better be life or death." "I think it might be," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Davenport sighed theatrically and clicked open his inbox. At the top was an email with the subject line, "Official Notice of Contract Termination. Project Nightingale Agreement." The sender was Robert Stanton, Chief Counsel, Vance Innovations. Davenport's blood ran cold. This had to be a mistake. A prank. He opened the email. The formal legal language was like a series of hammer blows. Pursuant to Clause 17.4, reputational harm and partner conduct, triggered by the discriminatory and unprofessional actions of Aura Air employee Ms. Karen Miller. Incident involving Mr. Elias Vance at JFK Terminal 4, Gate B27. All agreements, partnerships, and shared ventures related to Project Nightingale are hereby terminated effective immediately. Demand for penalty payments and asset recovery will follow under separate cover. Davenport stared at the screen, his mind refusing to process the words. Elias Vance. He knew the name. He was Marcus Vance's brilliant son, the boy genius behind the whole system. What could have possibly happened at a boarding gate? His phone buzzed. It was his chief technology officer. "Richard, what the hell is going on?" the CTO shouted, forgetting all decorum. "We're locked out. Everything from Vance is gone. The shared servers are wiped. The integration portals are offline. Our dev teams are staring at dead screens. It's like they just vanished from the internet." Before Davenport could answer, another call came in. The head of their Asian operations. "Richard, I just got a call from our partners at Changi Airport. They received a notice from Vance Innovations that the biometric security and logistics platform is being withdrawn. They're threatening to pull our landing slots." The conference call with the Singaporean investors was still active on his screen. He had forgotten to end the meeting. One of them, a man named Mr. Lim, was now speaking, his voice icy. "Davenport, I assume you have seen the email that was just forwarded to your board and to us. Can you explain why the core technology partner for the expansion you were just praising has summarily terminated your agreement?" Richard. Davenport felt the floor drop out from under him. The God's eye view from his own corner office suddenly felt like a precipice. A single gate agent. A boy in a hoodie. In the space of an hour, his $2 billion revolution had become a smoking crater, and he had no idea why. All he knew was a name, Karen Miller. And he was beginning to understand that she hadn't just denied boarding to a passenger. She had, for all intents and purposes, just hijacked his entire airline and flown it straight into the ground. The email was the spark. The ensuing 60 minutes were the explosion. At the Vance Innovations Black Site data center in rural Virginia, a team of elite network engineers received the command from Marcus Vance. For them, it wasn't a question of why. It was a question of how fast. The man who signed their paychecks, a man who paid them astronomical salaries for their loyalty and skill, had given a direct order. The head of the security team, a former Mossad cybersecurity expert named David Ben David, addressed his team in the sterile, ice-cold server room. "You heard the man. Kill switch protocol. Project Nightingale. Terminate all external connections. Purge all shared data caches. Revoke all Aura Air credentials. I want them firewalled, blacklisted, and sandboxed in the next 20 minutes. Move." What happened next was a masterclass in digital demolition. It wasn't a clumsy hack. It was a surgical amputation. First, the API keys that allowed Aura Air's legacy systems to communicate with the Nightingale platform were instantly revoked. Thousands of lines of code in Aura Air's backend designed to query Nightingale for everything from passenger manifests to cargo weight distribution suddenly started returning 403 forbidden errors. Next, the cloud-based servers, hosted by Vance Innovations, which held the terabytes of data for the new biometric check-in, automated gate management, and AI-powered flight scheduling were firewalled. One moment, Aura Air's CTO could see the server status on his dashboard. The next, they simply ceased to exist from his network's point of view. Finally, the most devastating blow. The Nightingale system had a fail-deadly security feature designed by Elias himself. If the system detected a hostile or unauthorized attempt at termination, it didn't just shut down. It performed a cryptographic erasure of all Vance proprietary data on the shared servers. The command from Marcus Vance was the authorized trigger. The erasure began. Complex algorithms that had taken 3 years and over $300 million to develop predictive models for fuel consumption, dynamic gate assignment, logic, real-time luggage tracking AI were digitally shredded, turning them into meaningless binary gibberish in a matter of seconds. Back in Richard Davenport's office, the fallout was hitting in real time. His CTO was now practically screaming into the phone. "Richard, it's all gone. The source code, the databases, the documentation we had access to, it's been wiped. There's nothing left to even try and reverse engineer." "We have nothing." Jessica Chen, his assistant, was fielding calls from their international partners. Her face was a mask of controlled panic. "That was Haneda Airport in Tokyo," she reported, hanging up one line. "Vance just pulled their support for the automated cargo sorting system we were supposed to pilot next month. They're reverting to our old contract, which means we lose priority scheduling." She picked up another call. "Seoul Incheon." "Yes, I understand." She covered the mouthpiece. "They're cancelling the joint marketing campaign. Vance was a co-sponsor. The $2 billion expansion wasn't just a single deal. It was an intricate web of dozens of interconnected agreements, and Vance Innovations was the spider at the center. They were providing the technology, the security, the logistics backbone, and in many cases the financial guarantees. With Vance pulling out, the entire web was disintegrating thread by thread. Davenport, his face ashen, was finally beginning to grasp the scale of the catastrophe. This wasn't a contract dispute. This was corporate warfare. He turned to Jessica. "Get me Marcus Vance. Now. I don't care who you have to call. Get him on the phone." "I've tried, sir," she said, her voice strained. "His executive assistant said he is unavailable indefinitely." She said, and I quote, "All future correspondence should be directed to our legal department." Blocked. The most powerful man in the tech world had made himself unreachable. Desperate Davenport remembered the son. Elias Vance. He was the key. Maybe he could reason with the boy. He instructed Jessica to find a contact number for him, a school anything. While she searched, Davenport's mind raced back to the email. Karen Miller, Gate B27, a frayed passport, an unaccompanied minor dispute. How could something so trivial, so mundane, lead to this? It was like watching a skyscraper crumble because someone had flicked a cigarette butt into a trash can. He buzzed the head of JFK operations. "Frank, I need to know what happened at Gate B27 an hour ago. Flight AA127. An agent named Karen Miller denied boarding to a passenger, Elias Vance." "Tell me everything." Frank, the JFK station manager, sounded confused. "Richard, I haven't heard anything. Let me check the report." There was a pause, filled with the clicking of keys. "Okay, I see it. Denied boarding passenger, Vance Elias. Reason listed: agent discretion, suspicious documentation, and failure to comply with unaccompanied minor protocol. That's it. Standard procedure. Standard procedure just cost us $2 billion. Frank Davenport roared, his voice cracking. Get that agent. Karen Miller. Find her. I want her in my office tomorrow morning. Do not let her work another flight. Confiscate her badge. Escort her out of the airport if you have to. Just get her. The call ended. Davenport slumped in his chair, the adrenaline draining away, leaving a cold, terrifying dread. The stock market was closed, but he could already picture the bloodbath that would ensue in pre-market trading. News of this would leak. It always did. Aura Air's Asia expansion collapses would be the headline. The stock would plummet. The board would call for his head. His legacy, the grand achievement that was supposed to define his career, was now an anchor that was going to drag him and the entire company to the bottom of the ocean. It was then that Jessica looked up from her computer, her eyes wide. "Sir, I found something about Elias Vance." "What is it?" "A phone number." "No, sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper as she read from a screen. "It's an internal memo from Vance Innovations' R&D department. It was leaked to a tech blog last year. It's about Project Nightingale." She turned the tablet toward him. It showed an organization chart for the project. At the very top, listed as lead architect and chief developer, was a single name, Elias Vance. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and for Richard Davenport, it was a moment of soul-crushing clarity. They hadn't just insulted the son of their primary partner. They had humiliated the very architect of their salvation, the one person on the planet who had built the system they had pinned their future on. Karen Miller hadn't just turned away a passenger. She had looked the Michelangelo of their Sistine Chapel in the eye and told him his painting wasn't good enough to be in the gallery. And now he had taken his masterpiece and smashed it to pieces. The call came as Karen Miller was finishing her post-flight paperwork. Her shift was over, and she was feeling a sense of deep, righteous satisfaction. She had stood her ground. She had protected the integrity of her flight from a suspicious character. In her mind, the boy's cryptic, angry words were nothing more than the empty threats of a spoiled brat who didn't get his way. She imagined he was at the customer service desk right now, probably screaming at some poor agent about his rights. She chuckled to herself. He'd learn a lesson today about respecting authority. "Karen, Frank wants to see you in his office," her supervisor said, his tone uncharacteristically flat. "Can it wait?" "I'm about to clock out," she replied, annoyance coloring her voice. "No, Karen. It can't, now." A prickle of unease went down her spine. The supervisor wouldn't even meet her eyes. She gathered her things and made the short walk to the station manager's office. Frank was a portly man who usually had a smile on his face. Today he looked like he'd aged 10 years. His face was grey, his eyes bloodshot. "Shut the door," he said. It wasn't a request. She sat down, her purse clutched in her lap. "Frank, what's this about?" "If it's about the passenger I denied boarding, I have my report right here." The documentation was questionable, and he was belligerent. Frank looked at her, his expression a mixture of fury and despair. "Karen, what did you do? I did my job. I followed procedure." "No, you didn't," he snapped, slamming his hand on his desk, making her jump. "There is no procedure that says you can deny a 17-year-old boarding as an unaccompanied minor. Our policy is 15. There is no procedure that lets you unilaterally declare a U.S. passport invalid because of a frayed corner. You didn't follow procedure, Karen. You followed your prejudice, and you have sunk us all." Karen recoiled, offended. "My prejudice." "That's an outrageous accusation. I was ensuring the safety and security of—" "Safety." Frank laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Let me tell you what you did for our safety. The passenger you denied boarding was Elias Vance. The name meant nothing to her. So he is the son of Marcus Vance, the founder and CEO of Vance Innovations," Frank said, leaning forward, enunciating each word as if speaking to a child. Vance Innovations is the company that was underwriting and building the entire technological infrastructure for our $2 billion expansion into Asia. The expansion that has been the singular focus of this company for 3 years. Karen's mouth went dry. This was insane. It had to be a joke. Frank continued, his voice low and venomous. "In the hour since you denied him boarding, Vance, Innovations has terminated their contract with us. They have digitally wiped every piece of proprietary software we were relying on. Every partner we had in Asia, from Singapore to Tokyo, is pulling out because the technology they were promised no longer exists. Our stock is predicted to lose 80% of its value when the market opens tomorrow. The board is in an emergency session. Our CEO, Richard Davenport, is about to be fired. The entire company is on the verge of collapse." He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the small, silent office. "All because you didn't like the look of a kid in a hoodie." Karen was speechless. Her mind was a whirlwind of denial. It couldn't be true. It was impossible. A single passenger. He can't do that," she whispered. "He can. And he did." Frank said, his voice weary now. "You didn't just turn away a passenger, Karen. You turned away the key. That kid, that 17-year-old boy, was the lead architect of the entire system. He built it." The righteous satisfaction she had felt just minutes before curdled into a cold, sickening horror. The boy's calm, chilling words came back to her. "You are making a very, very big mistake." She hadn't been threatened by a spoiled brat. She had been warned by a king whose crown she couldn't see. "I've been instructed to inform you that your employment with Aura Air is terminated." "Effective immediately," Frank said, reading from a formal script on his screen. "You are to hand over your company ID and all other property. Security will escort you from the premises." Fired. The word was a choked gasp. She had been with the airline for 22 years. It was her life, her identity. "You can't. I have a union. I have seniority." "The union can't help you, Karen," Frank said, shaking his head. "The company is likely to declare bankruptcy. There won't be a company left for the union to negotiate with. You brought an existential threat to this airline. They will fight you with every lawyer they have left. And they will win." Security arrived, 2 large men in formal uniforms. They stood by the door, their presence clinical and intimidating. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on her, a physical blow. The job, the benefits, the pension, she was counting on it, was all gone. She began to sob, not quiet tears, but racking, hysterical sobs of pure panic. "Please, Frank," she begged. "It was a mistake. I didn't know I can apologize to him." "It is far, far too late for that," Frank said, turning back to his computer, unable to look at her any longer. "Please escort Ms. Miller out." As the security guards gently but firmly led her from the office, past the curious and pitying stares of her former colleagues, Karen Miller's world had completely unraveled. She wasn't just unemployed. She was the scapegoat for a corporate disaster of unimaginable proportions. Her name was now synonymous with the single greatest failure in the airline's history. That night she sat in her small apartment in Queens, the television off, the silence deafening. Her phone started to buzz incessantly. Friends, family, other airline workers who had heard the rumors. She couldn't answer. Then a notification popped up from a news app. The headline from an anonymous source, but already spreading like wildfire in financial circles, read Aura Air's 2B. Asia expansion implodes. After partner Vance Innovations abruptly terminates contract. The article didn't have all the details yet. It spoke of a material breach and a significant contractual dispute. But Karen knew the truth. She was the material breach. She was the dispute. She had been the gatekeeper, and in her arrogant, petty exercise of power, she had not only locked the gate on one passenger, she had locked the gate on her own future and thrown away the key. The karma was not just hard, it was absolute. 2 days later, Richard Davenport was granted an audience. It wasn't a meeting between peers, it was a summons. The location was not a neutral boardroom, but the top floor of the Vance Innovations Tower. The time was not at his convenience. He was told to be there at 7:00 a.m. sharp. Davenport hadn't slept. He had watched in abject horror as Aura Air's stock ticker Aura cratered in pre-market trading opening with a staggering 78% loss. The $2 billion in market capitalization they had gained in anticipation of the Asia expansion had been wiped out along with another $3 billion for good measure. His board had already asked for his resignation, offering him a paltry severance package to go quietly. His career was over. This meeting was his last desperate, 1 in a million shot at salvaging something from the wreckage. He was led not into a conference room, but into Marcus Vance's personal office. The view of the awakening city was breathtaking, but Davenport felt like he was on a scaffold. Marcus Vance was not sitting behind his desk. He was standing by the window, a silhouette against the morning light, his posture radiating an intimidating stillness. And next to him, sitting quietly in an armchair, holding a tablet, was Elias Vance. He wasn't wearing a hoodie today. He was dressed in a simple, well-fitting black long-sleeved shirt and dark pants. He looked up as Davenport entered, his expression not angry, not triumphant, but neutral, analytical. It was the look of a scientist observing a specimen. It was somehow more terrifying than open rage. But Davenport Marcus said, his voice as cold as the glass of the window he stood beside. "Thank you for coming." There was no offer to sit. "Marcus," Elias Davenport began, his voice hoarse. I am here to offer my most profound, my most sincere and unreserved apology for what happened. It was a catastrophic failure of our service, our training, and our values. The employee responsible has been terminated. There are no words to express how sorry I am for the humiliation and disrespect Elias was shown. He directed his gaze to the boy. "Elias, what happened to you was inexcusable. It is an embarrassment to my company, and to me personally. I am deeply, deeply sorry." Elias listened, his fingers tapping softly on his tablet. He didn't respond. Marcus spoke again. "Apologies are words, Richard. Actions have consequences. Your company's actions have led to our actions. The contract is terminated. That is final." "Marcus, please." Davenport pleaded, his corporate pride stripped away, leaving only raw desperation. "We have to find a way to fix this. Name your price. A penalty payment. A public apology. We'll donate $10 million to a charity of your choice. We will fire the entire JFK management team. I will personally resign if that's what it takes. But please don't kill the company. Don't destroy the jobs of 30,000 innocent employees because of one person's ignorance." Marcus finally turned from the window, his eyes fixing on Davenport. Innocent employees. Was the supervisor who ignored protocol. Innocent was the station manager who fostered a culture where an agent felt empowered to act like that innocent. Was the CEO who was so disconnected from his own operations that he didn't even know who was building his company's future innocent. Each question was a physical blow. "This is not about money," Marcus continued, gesturing toward his son. "This is about a principle. My son, the architect of your future, was deemed unworthy to sit on one of your planes. He was treated like a criminal. You didn't just break a contract, Richard. You broke faith." It was then that Elias finally spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying across the vast office. "Mr. Davenport, the problem isn't just what Ms. Miller did. It's that she was able to do it. Your system allowed for it." He looked down at his tablet. "I've been reviewing the incident logs. Ms. Miller overrode 2 system flags to deny me boarding. The first was the age verification flag, which clearly marked me as an eligible traveler, not an unaccompanied minor. The second was the passport validation flag from the initial check-in scan, which confirmed my document was authentic. She had to manually input a reason for the override. She chose agent discretion." Elias looked up, his eyes meeting Davenport's. "That's the fatal flaw in your system. Agent discretion. You gave one person with a personal bias arbitrary power to overrule data and logic. You built a system with a back door for prejudice. I cannot and will not stake my work, my name, or my company's reputation on a foundation that flawed." Davenport was stunned by the clinical precision of the analysis. The boy wasn't just hurt. He had diagnosed the disease that had killed their partnership. "We can fix it," Davenport said, grasping at straws. "You can help us fix it. We'll rewrite the protocols. We'll remove that discretion. We'll build whatever you want." Elias gave a small, sad shake of his head. "It's too late. The trust is gone. The termination of the Nightingale project is irreversible. The proprietary code has been erased. The hardware partnerships have been dissolved. Even if we wanted to, it would take years to rebuild. And we have no interest in doing so." He stood up. "You wanted to know what my price was, Mr. Davenport. It was respect, and you couldn't afford it." With that, Elias Vance turned and walked out of the office, leaving a shattered silence in his wake. Marcus Vance walked to his desk and sat down, a silent dismissal. "I believe we're done here, Richard." Defeated Richard. Davenport turned and left. As he rode the elevator down, he knew his fate was sealed. He had come seeking a deal, a negotiation, but he had walked into a courtroom where the verdict had already been delivered. It wasn't about business. It had been about a fundamental lesson in dignity. A lesson his company had failed, and for which it was now paying the ultimate price. For Karen Miller, the immediate aftermath was a blur of shame and fear. Being fired was just the beginning. The real nightmare started about 48 hours later, when the first passenger video surfaced. A business traveler who had been sitting near the gate and had been disturbed by Karen's loud, condescending tone had discreetly filmed the last 2 minutes of the encounter. The video was shaky, the audio slightly muffled by airport noise, but it was damning. It captured Karen's smug dismissal, her sharp, accusatory questions, and most chillingly, Elias's calm, prophetic words, "You just cost your company its entire Asia expansion." The video was posted to TikTok and Twitter with the caption, "Flight attendant at JFK. Has a power trip, harasses teen. And he apparently cancels the whole airline, LOL." The poster had no idea how true it was. It went viral overnight. First, the aviation bloggers and travel influencers picked it up. They connected the video to the now public news of Aura Air's collapse. The LOL turned into OMG. The story exploded. Flightgate and #Karen Miller began trending. News outlets desperate for the human element behind the financial disaster story pounced. Her full name, gleaned from the video and confirmed by airline insiders, was everywhere. Her photo was splashed across news websites from the Daily Mail to Forbes. Karen became a digital ghost, a pariah in her own life. Her phone number and address were leaked on dark corners of the internet. She received threats. Vile, hateful messages clogged her email and social media, which she quickly deleted. Pizzerias she didn't order were delivered to her door day and night, a classic juvenile form of harassment that felt deeply unsettling. She couldn't leave her apartment without neighbors staring or whispering. A trip to the grocery store became an ordeal with people pointing and filming her with their phones. One person shouted, "Hey, it's the $2 billion Karen." Her attempts to find new work were hopeless. She was the most toxic name in the airline industry. No carrier would touch her. She applied for retail jobs, administrative positions, anything. But a quick Google search of her name was a professional death sentence. One interviewer at a department store cut the interview short after just 5 minutes, saying coolly, "I don't think you'd be a good fit for our customer-facing roles." The subtext was clear. Her personal life crumbled. Her sister, whose husband was an Aura Air pilot, now facing unemployment, stopped speaking to her. Friends distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with the controversy. She was an island isolated by an act of arrogance that had lasted less than 10 minutes. The karma was not just financial or professional. It was deeply personal and psychological. She was trapped in a prison of her own, forced to relive her mistake every time she saw someone look at her with recognition, every time her name was mentioned online. The power she had so enjoyed wielding at the gate was a pittance compared to the crushing power of public opinion. She had made a teenager feel small and powerless for a few minutes. In return, the world made her feel small and powerless for the rest of her life. Months went by. Aura Air, unable to recover, was eventually bought out in a fire sale by a larger competitor for pennies on the dollar. The name Aura Air was retired, its livery painted over. The company was now just a footnote in business school case studies about risk management. Richard Davenport disappeared from the corporate world, living in forced retirement. One bleak afternoon, Karen found herself in a coffee shop, nursing a cheap coffee for hours to stay out of the cold. She overheard 2 young women at the next table talking. "Did you hear about that new Vance Foundation, the Access Wings program?" one asked. "Oh yeah, my cousin applied the other," said excitedly. "They give flight grants to underprivileged kids in STEM programs to go to conferences and stuff. It's run by that genius kid Elias Vance. They say he created it because of some bad experience he had at an airport." Karen froze the coffee cup, trembling in her hand. She looked down, pulling her cheap wool hat lower, hoping no one would recognize her haunted face. The karma had one final brutal twist. Elias Vance had taken the pain and humiliation she had inflicted on him and transmuted it. He had used the fallout from her actions not just for revenge, but to build something positive. something that stood for the exact opposite of what she had done. He was creating opportunities, opening doors for kids who looked like him, kids who might otherwise be told they didn't belong. Her legacy was a disaster. His was becoming one of hope. She had tried to close a gate on him, and in response he had opened a gate to the world for countless others. That she realized with a soul-crushing certainty was the cruelest justice of all. She wasn't just a ghost of her former life. She was an irrelevant, forgotten footnote in a story where he had become the hero. 1 year later. The name Aura Air was already fading from public memory, relegated to business school textbooks as a cautionary tale titled The $2 Billion Gate Agent. The airline's assets had been absorbed, its planes repainted, and its employees scattered to other carriers, many still bitter about the sudden collapse. Richard Davenport, after a brief and brutal battle with the board, had signed a non-disclosure agreement and retired to a life of quiet, wealthy obscurity, his legacy forever tainted. For Karen Miller, there was no quiet retirement. There was only the daily grind of anonymity. She had moved to a different state, changed her appearance, and now worked an early morning shift stocking shelves at a large impersonal supermarket. She was Catherine Smith, a woman with no past. She kept her head down, spoke to no one, and flinched whenever she saw someone holding up a phone. She had not been arrested or fined, but she was serving a life sentence of irrelevance and fear, haunted by the ghost of Gate B27. The financial security she had been so proud of was gone, replaced by a minimum wage existence where every dollar was counted. This was the final grinding turn of karma's wheel, but the story no longer revolved around them. It had moved on, centered now in a bright, modern office in downtown Austin, Texas. This was the headquarters of the Access Wings Foundation. Elias Vance, now 18, and deferring his admission to MIT, stood before a large monitor. It displayed a world map dotted with flight paths, not for a commercial airline, but for individuals. A young woman from Detroit, flying to her first robotics competition in Germany. A team of students from rural Idaho, flying to a coding boot camp in California. A budding marine biologist from the Bronx, flying to a research internship in the Galapagos. The foundation, funded by a significant personal endowment from Marcus Vance, and powered by the repurposed non-proprietary elements of the Nightingale Project's logistics software, had one simple mission: to eliminate travel as a barrier for talented young minds from underprivileged backgrounds. His father Marcus leaned against the doorframe, watching his son. The cold fury he had felt that day at JFK had long since subsided, replaced by a deep, quiet pride. He had been ready to wage a scorched earth war on Aura Air to crush them into dust. But Elias had stopped him. "Revenge is a bad investment, Dad," Elias had said a few weeks after the incident. "It has no return. Let's build something instead." And so they had. The tech that was meant to track first-class luggage and optimize fuel consumption for a corporate giant was now used to find the most affordable flights for students and manage their travel itineraries. The biometric security protocols were adapted to help young first-time international travelers navigate complex airports safely. Jessica Chen, the sharp young assistant who had tried to warn Richard Davenport, was now the chief operating officer of Access Wings. After Aura Air's collapse, Elias had personally sought her out. He had seen her competence and integrity amidst the chaos, and knew she was the right person to help run his new venture. She had accepted immediately, grateful for the chance to be part of something positive. "The first cohort just landed in Singapore," Jessica said, walking up to Elias with a tablet. The welcome packet you designed was a huge hit. The step-by-step guide through Changi Airport worked perfectly. Elias smiled a genuine relaxed smile that had been absent a year ago. Good. The whole point is to make them feel like they belong there from the second they step off the plane. He looked at the map at the glowing lines representing journeys and opportunities. He had faced down prejudice in a sterile airport terminal and had been tempted by the immense power to destroy. But he had chosen a different path. He realized that the greatest power wasn't in cancelling flights or crashing stock prices. It was in creating them. It was in giving wings to those who had been told they were meant to stay on the ground. He had been denied boarding once told he didn't belong. Now every single day he sent a clear message to hundreds of kids just like him. You belong. The sky is yours. He had taken the worst moment of his life and transformed it into the best part of his legacy. The karma wasn't just that the antagonist lost. It was that the protagonist had won in a way that lifted everyone else up with him. And so the story of Aura Air comes to an end. It serves as a stunning real-world example of the butterfly effect, how a small, ugly act of prejudice at a single airport gate can ripple outwards, causing a tidal wave of destruction. Karen Miller sought to enforce a power that wasn't hers, and in doing so lost everything. Richard Davenport led a company that built a back door for bias into its system, and he watched his entire empire fall through it. But the most important part of this story isn't the fall. It's what was built in its place. Elias Vance could have stopped at revenge. He could have simply taken his ball and gone home. But instead he took the resources from the failed Nightingale project and created the Access Wings Foundation, turning a moment of personal humiliation into a force for global good. He proved that true power isn't about closing gates on people. It's about building new ones. What do you think? Was this karma served cold, or was it a tragedy for the thousands of employees who lost their jobs? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of justice and consequence. Thanks for watching.